In a fictional Washington, D.C. courtroom, a seismic legal battle unfolds, pitting Pam Bondi, former Florida Attorney General and a formidable legal figure, against Judge James Boisberg, a once respected federal judge now accused of judicial misconduct and systemic corruption. The case transcends a single man's actions, exposing a sprawling network of political influence that threatens the integrity of the American justice system. Through evidence, testimony, and unrelenting courtroom strategy, Bondi dismantles Boisberg's legacy and unveils a broader conspiracy, transforming the trial into a reckoning for a compromised judiciary. The courtroom buzzes with anticipation as Bondi stands before a jury, her presence commanding and resolute. Boisberg, seated at the defense table, faces charges that challenge his decades-long career. Once a towering figure in the judiciary, he now appears diminished, his stoic demeanor masking the weight of the accusations. The case centers on allegations that Boisberg manipulated rulings to favor political allies, particularly those tied to democratic interests, while shielding powerful figures from accountability. Bondi, a relentless advocate for justice, frames the trial not as a personal vendetta, but as a crusade to restore trust in a system tainted by favoritism and hidden agendas. Bondi's opening statement sets the tone, accusing Boisberg of crossing ethical lines repeatedly. She argues that his judicial decisions, spanning immigration, national security, and high-profile leaks, reflect a pattern of bias rather than impartiality. The jury leans forward as she introduces the first piece of evidence, a photograph showing Boisberg smiling alongside Doug Emhoff, husband of Vice President Kamala Harris, at a private event. The image, while not definitive proof, raises questions about Boisberg's proximity to political power. Bondi suggests this connection is no coincidence, but part of a broader web of influence, a theme she returns to throughout the trial. The prosecution's case hinges on a specific incident, Boisberg's handling of a case involving a leaked signal chat among high-level defense officials. The chat, which included discussions of theoretical military strike plans in the Middle East, became a public scandal when messages surfaced in the media. Though no classified information was confirmed, the breach exposed vulnerabilities in secure communications. Boisberg, assigned to the case, dismissed key elements and downplayed its severity, prompting critics to argue he protected political allies. Bondi seizes on this, questioning why Boisberg, of all judges, was chosen for such a politically charged matter. She contrasts his leniency in the Signal case with his stringent rulings against Trump-era policies, like deportation flights for convicted criminals, which he blocked, citing humanitarian concerns. To bolster her argument, Bondi presents internal emails obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request. The correspondence exchanged between Boisberg's office and White House legal advisors hints at coordination before the Signal case assignment. While not explicitly incriminating, the email's tone and timing suggest discussions about managing public perception rather than legal merits. The courtroom gasps as Bondi lets the implications linger, challenging Boisberg to explain the communications. His response, that the emails were routine, falls flat against the mounting evidence of impropriety. Bondi's strategy extends beyond individual actions, painting Boisberg as a cog in a larger machine. She introduces a timeline of his judicial appointments, highlighting his rise from a D.C. Superior Court judge, to a presiding role on the secretive Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. The timeline reveals a pattern. Boisberg consistently presided over cases involving Democratic interests or Trump-era controversies, from surveillance oversight to immigration disputes. Bondi questions the randomness of these assignments, citing internal court memos that allow judges with prior experience in national security to be selected for sensitive cases. She argues this vague standard enables manipulation, allowing conflicted judges like Boisberg to remain on cases without recusing themselves. The prosecution's case gains momentum with a bombshell: testimony from an anonymous whistleblower, a former Department of Defense systems coordinator. Speaking via a secure video feed, the whistleblower reveals that the Signal chat leak triggered selective shielding of top officials. Names tied to Democratic leadership were scrubbed from internal reports, while lower-level staff were scapegoated to deflect scrutiny. The whistleblower alleges a White House policy liaison directed these efforts, claiming Boisberg was in the loop to manage the case's optics. The testimony electrifies the courtroom, shifting the narrative from one judge's misconduct to a coordinated effort to control judicial outcomes. Boisberg's defense objects, calling the claims unverified, but the damage is done. The jury now sees a system designed to protect the powerful. Bondi builds on this revelation with a calendar log showing meetings between Department of Justice officials and White House policy staff before the Signal case assignment. A handwritten note in the margin reads, "JB will take Signal suit. Prep optics memos." Though unsigned, the note fuels speculation that Boisberg was pre-selected for the case. The defense argues the initials JB are inconclusive, but Bondi counters with a pointed question: if not Boisberg, who else could it refer to? The jury's unease grows as she presses Boisberg on his failure to recuse himself, given his documented social ties to Democratic figures like Emhoff and Senator Mark Warner, whom he dined with at a Georgetown event hosted by a nonprofit linked to a Democratic super PAC. The trial's scope expands as Bondi introduces a classified government memo leaked by an intelligence community source. The document, a review of judicial assignments, details how cases were strategically funneled to judges expected to rule in favor of specific political agendas. Boisberg is named a trusted ally in high-profile matters, alongside other judges tied to both Democratic and Republican administrations. The memo exposes a network spanning government agencies, media, and political donors, a deep state orchestrating outcomes behind closed doors. Bondi's voice lowers to a near whisper as she describes this web, drawing the jury into the gravity of the revelation. The term deep state resonates, framing Boisberg not as an isolated actor, but as a beneficiary of systemic corruption. Throughout the proceedings, Bondi contrasts Boisberg's selective enforcement with broader failures of accountability. She references the chaotic Afghanistan withdrawal, where 13 American soldiers died without resignations or trials, yet the Signal chat leak prompted lawsuits and purges overseen by Boisberg. The comparison underscores her argument that justice under Boisberg was not blind, but choreographed to protect certain interests. A printed tweet from Boisberg's former law clerk praising his reliability before the Signal ruling further suggests favoritism was expected, not incidental. The courtroom stirs as Bondi declares, "They weren't waiting for justice. They were counting on it. In a dramatic move, Bondi calls Boisberg to testify. Under oath, he faces questions about his relationships with Democratic officials and his knowledge of the signal case assignment. His responses are measured but evasive, admitting only that a dinner with Emhoff, perhaps, warranted disclosure in hindsight. The admission, though small, carries weight, a crack in his impenetrable facade. Bondi requests his testimony be submitted to the Judicial Ethics Board, a move that signals the trial's implications extend beyond the courtroom. The judge presiding over the case, an impartial federal appointee, grants the request, amplifying the stakes. As evidence mounts, Boisberg's defense weakens. His legal team argues that judicial assignments are randomized and that social connections do not prove bias. But Bondi's relentless presentation of documents, testimony, and patterns undermines their claims. The courtroom becomes a battlefield, with Boisberg's once untouchable status eroding under scrutiny. Outside, protests brew. Some hail Bondi as a hero exposing corruption. Others decry the trial as a politicized witch hunt. The media amplifies the divide, with headlines debating Boisberg's guilt and the existence of a deep state. Yet inside, Bondi remains focused, her calm demeanor masking the ferocity of her mission. The trial's climax arrives with Bondi's closing statement, a powerful appeal to the jury's sense of duty. She frames the case as a fight, not just against Boisberg, but against a system that allowed his rise. Displaying a list of names tied to the judicial network, she argues these figures, orchestrators of assignments and protectors of influence, are the true architects of corruption. Her voice rings with conviction as she urges the jury to restore faith in justice, emphasizing that no one, neither the powerful nor the judges meant to serve the public, should be above the law. The courtroom falls silent, the weight of her words palpable. The jury deliberates and returns a verdict. Boisberg is guilty of misconduct and abuse of power. The decision reverberates beyond the courtroom, sparking investigations into the broader network Bondi exposed. The list of names becomes a focal point, with leaked documents and whistleblower accounts fueling inquiries into judicial assignments across the federal system. Boisberg, once a symbol of judicial authority, is reduced to a cautionary tale. A man who wielded power to shield allies and now faces the consequences. Bondi stands outside the courthouse, cameras flashing around her. Her thoughts, however, are not on the spotlight, but on the future. The trial has dismantled a system many believed invincible, but she knows the work is unfinished. The verdict is not just a conviction, but a call to action, a demand for a justice system rooted in integrity, not manipulation. The nation buzzes with debate, some defending Boisberg as a scapegoat, others celebrating the exposure of hidden influence. Congress responds with bipartisan calls for reform, while the Department of Justice remains silent, its role in the network under scrutiny. The narrative concludes with a transformed landscape. The courthouse, once a symbol of order, now represents a battleground where truth clashed with power. Bondi emerges as more than a prosecutor. She is a catalyst, tearing down a structure built on secrecy and privilege. Boisberg's fall is not the end, but a beginning, a spark igniting demands for transparency and fairness. The trial, though centered on one judge, becomes a referendum on the system itself, challenging the public to reject corruption and rebuild trust in the rule of law.